Slide 3. Now, what is financial stability? It appears extremely hard to define this precisely or comprehensively. Allen, an academic writer, points out that although many international financial instruments mention the concept of financial stability, they genuinely neglect to define it. So I agree with other writers that the measurement of financial stability is surrounded by fuzziness. And the workbook, I can conclude that financial stability is the converse of financial instability. Now, in South Africa, there was a material difficulty with the concept of financial stability before 2017 because it was neither mentioned in the Constitution or in the South African Reserve Bank Act to say that the South African Reserve Bank should play a role in that. So the SARB's role before 2017 concerning financial stability was mainly an implied role. Slide 4. Then the Financial Sector Regulation Act came after many years of working on it, and it was implemented on 1 April 2018. So the importance of this act was that it launched the twin peak system of financial regulation in South Africa, and the main focus of this act is the maintenance of financial stability in the markets. The object of the act, as you can see there on the screen, is to achieve a stable financial system that works in the interest of financial customers and supports balanced and sustainable economic growth in the Republic by establishing a regulatory and supervisory framework that promotes financial stability. Slide 5. So the essence of the South African shift towards a Twin Peaks model of financial regulation was that the financial sector was made safer through a comprehensive financial stability framework with 3 prominent regulators, namely the South African Reserve Bank, functioning as a central bank, as the primary guardian of financial stability, and 2 new regulators, the Prudential Authority, with the object of system-wide financial soundness and financial of financial institutions, and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority as the system-wide market conduct regulator. Slide 6. Financial stability is the main focus of the FSR Act, and Section 4 of the Act determines that financial stability exists where financial institutions generally provide financial products and financial services without interruption, and where they can do so, continue to do so despite changes in the economic circumstances, and where there is general confidence that they will have the ability to continue to do so without interruption. So with the enactment of the FSR Act, the role of the SARB as central bank regarding financial stability was changed significantly. So under the new Twin Peaks system of financial regulation, the financial stability mandate of the SARB includes various powers. It requires the SARB to supervise financial institutions operating in the financial system and to monitor the financial system and act preemptively to prevent disruption of financial stability. You can close the slides. So to come back to the concept of sustainable economic development, this term, as you all know, was developed in the 1970s, and it was conceptually defined through soft law instruments like the UN's General Assembly resolutions, declarations, and action plans. Its implementation was done through more concrete international treaties. So the definitions for sustainable development vary. After the Brundtland Report in 1987, the definition was adopted as not a fixed state of harmony, but rather a process of change in which the exploitation of resources, the direction of investments, the orientation of technological development, and institutional change are made consistent with future as well as present needs. So if you look at the AFCFTA and Sustainable Economic Development, as you know, it was signed in March 2018, bringing the 54 countries in Africa together to form a single market to enhance African integration and to challenge hindrances and barriers to the intra-Africa trade. So this agreement presented an opportunity for African economies to fast-track their transformation to become part of a broader economy in the world. And if this can happen, it would unlock the benefits of trade for Africa, leading to sustainable growth and economic development. So an example of the benefits of trading between African countries is seen in South African supermarkets chains that had 554 stores in 2017 all over Africa. So although these stores still mainly are supplied with products from South Africa, local supply is steadily increasing, and regional governments are pressurizing the supermarkets to expand the domestic supply from local firms and farms. So the AFCFTA has the potential to address the main challenges of regional and continental integration in Africa, leading to higher returns for investors, of which we had many discussions in the previous 2 days. But a study reviewed the impact of international trade flows on the sustainable economic development of members of these AFCFTA countries between 2005 and 2019, and they found that with higher spending on infrastructure such as electricity and on education, sustainable development goals among these countries were realized considerably more. And they concluded that trade across borders assists in the sustainable development of member countries, and they recommend that the government should improve infrastructure facilities to attract more foreign and other investors to the country so that the infrastructure could be enhanced quicker. In South Africa, the Department of Trade and Industry has reiterated in March 2021 that sustainable growth requires inclusive growth and transformation, and that the AFCFTA brings Africa a step closer to the historic vision of an integrated market. Just to show that South Africa is keen on this. So the DTI emphasized that this has to be complemented with work on infrastructure and the capacity in Africa to manufacture goods, very important, so that we can export, so that the benefits of this trade agreement will be shared across the continent. Now, as I mentioned before, in the FSO Act, the object of the Act refers to a stable economic system and where it supports balanced and sustainable economic growth. But financial or sustainable economic growth is also embedded in our constitution in section 224, where the primary object of the South African Reserve Bank is stated as to protect the value of the currency in the interest of balanced and sustainable economic growth in South Africa. So as sustainable development is mentioned in the constitution, there is a more reason that it will be applied. So there is a nexus between financial stability and sustainable economic development, and I'm not going to go into that, but research has found that for sustainable economic growth, you need financial stability. So I want to conclude that it is clear from all that I've said that through the AFCFTA, the goal of sustainable economic development in Africa can be enhanced, leading to more economic growth and prosperity in the continent. And, as it was said a few times already, to achieve this, government should invest in more bridges, roads, ports, infrastructure, education, health, so that the marginal productivity of member countries is improved and their economies can move towards sustainable development. So the research in this contribution shows that financial stability has a positive effect on sustainable economic development, and even more than that, it is a requisite for sustainable economic development. So the reform of financial regulation brought about by the FSR Act in South Africa has aided in the consciousness of sustainable economic development, and the FSR Act will add to the protection of the constitutional value of sustainable economic development. Now, to ensure that economic issues and challenges are addressed, financial regulators like the SARB should apply the powers awarded to them in the Act, and in the FSR Act and in the Constitution, to ensure financial stability and to ensure that sustainable economic development goals can be achieved in South Africa. So finally, I've made this a South African perspective, but all of this would be true for all other countries, that they should strive for financial stability, because that will enhance all the other things we desperately need. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Van Niekerk, and I'm glad that I didn't have to stop you. Our third and final panelist today joins us from Kenya, virtually. Can you hear us, Mayombe Oduba? Mayombe Oduba will
yes,
speak.
I can hear you.
Perfect. Welcome. So Dr. Oduba will speak on energy, climate change, just like digital currencies, just like financial stability. It is an issue that is often not connected with constitutionalism and constitutional governance. And so, Dr. Oduba, we are privileged to have you here. Just like the other panelists, I'll give you 15 minutes, and I hope I don't have to stop you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to present. As you probably already see from the title, the question that this paper seeks to address is how we move from a conflict to a confluence of interests when legislating energy, climate change, and sustainable development. To truly understand the genesis of conflict between the legislation of energy, climate change, and sustainable development in Kenya, one must begin to evaluate how Kenya's obligations under international law have been absorbed in its legal enterprise remain within the international legal order. On one hand, Kenya recognizes the urgency of fulfilling its commitments towards advancing its citizens' socio-economic rights of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which impose a duty on states to guarantee the right to an adequate standard of living, as well as the framework for market and non-market sustainable development under Article 6 of the recently signed Paris Agreement, which just builds upon the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change commitment, rather than taking the opportunity offered by the Paris Agreement to revert to pre-colonial ideals that sought to integrate nature and sustainable socio-economic development. Kenyan policymakers have opted instead to maximize the ability to exploit economic development to enjoy wide protection under international economic law. To exemplify, we have the continued commodification of natural habitats and resources that is exacerbated by the privatization of the commons and the seemingly sacrosanct protection of private property rights. Additionally, the failure to clearly systemize accountability mechanisms for the environmental cost of production within the general frame the same. The dichotomy in international law that southern countries like Kenya have to grapple with is best demonstrated through its energy sector. Electrical energy in Kenya began as what scholars have dubbed as a tool of empire through the East Africa Power and Lightning Company. Its access was strictly limited to the mostly European and Indian urban population who dominated the political economy, but the resources facilitating the electrical generation were taken from rural areas that were largely inhabited by indigenous African populations who were equally deprived of the benefits of their resources. The absence of rural electrification was done to establish non-African settlers and their resource extractive policies as a civilizing and modernizing force in indigenous legal thought. Separate from the protectorate with industries in the mainland, public electricity supply never fully evolved became central to the legislation of energy, environment, and development in Kenya. Fast forward to Kenya's 2010 constitution, this is now when we begin to move towards a conference. The constitution strongly embodies Kenya's obligations under international environmental law. Besides being party to the Paris Agreement and domesticating the general rules of its international responsibilities through Article 2, subsection 5 of the Constitution, the provisions of this Constitution evolve Kenya into an environmental state. The preamble is the first indicator of this development. It emphasizes our respect for the environment and its importance to the country's national heritage, as well as including the principle of inter- and intergenerational equity in the management of the environment. Furthermore, the principle of sustainable development in itself is expressly entrenched in Article 10, subsection 2 of the Constitution, as one of the national values of principles and governance. Under Article 69, the state has a duty to ensure that natural resources are utilized, managed, and conserved sustainably and equitably. Finally, Article 70 provides the right to a clean and healthy environment, and Article 42 sets up a mechanism for enforcing action and compensation to those who are deprived of this right. In terms of energy, the effect has been twofold. The first has been the enactment of the Climate Change Act of 2016, which, by the way, is the first of its kind in Africa, which mandates the regulation and implementation of low carbon and climate resilient development in all sectors of the national economy. Consequently, this has culminated into the Energy Act of 2019, whose purpose is to support the transition to a green economy through the regulation of renewable energy and the limited but sustainable development of fossil fuels. Yet in terms of policy, the decarbonization of electrical energy has not been aggressively pursued for two main reasons in policy. The first being that electrification continues to be used as a tool of exercising political power because Kenya refuses to decolonize its natural governance system. As I previously mentioned before, with natural resources being centralized, it is a kleptocratic economic model that is sustained. And thus, electricity continues to exist along racial capitalist lines and class hierarchies to the exploitation of the political class. Secondly, the lower cost of non-renewable sources of energy in electricity production allows Kenya to achieve lower operating costs and thus expand access to energy in the short term, while similarly passing on the environmental burden of such activities onto the next administration without accountability. In a landmark ruling concerning the development of the Lamu coal power plant, the National Environmental Tribunal recognized that it's imperative that the right to development be balanced against the country's low carbon and climate resilience objectives, which are construed to be emblematic of constitutional values on sustainable development and the right to a healthy and safe environment. Inasmuch as the Lamu case sets a precedent, it has been denoted as an example of the Constitution's limitation on the enforceability of environmental rights, particularly because it's over-reliant on the judiciary's ability to interpret and enforce these rights. In a country where judicial independence is regularly threatened by the executive and legislature, the adoption of an activist character by the courts concerning the litigation of the environment carries considerable political risks and threatens its independence. It has been suggested that the introduction of green climate financing options such as green bonds under the Climate Change Act would provide a harmonization between energy sustainable development and climate change, as it enables Kenya to continue its economic development through the incentivization of cleaner energy alternatives that are more aligned with its climate change commitments. This would provide a legal framework that is reliant on institutions other than the government to advance the harmonization of their aforementioned issues. However, the green bond market and the green economy at large are not immune from the extractive philosophies that are deeply embedded in international economic law and its development models. Greenwashing bonds, that is the practice of falsely attributing environmentally positive credentials to a bond claimed to be green, is indicative of this phenomenon. Furthermore, as international green bonds are priced in dollars and euros, they continue to exacerbate the north-south divide. Local investors face greater risks when participating in the green bond market, due to the fact that currency movements may leave them with higher losses compared to investors from developed countries who can readily access and transact in dollar and euro currency denominations. Once again, although Kenya's constitutional framework has evolved to facilitate the harmonization of energy, sustainable development, and climate change, the success of such an endeavor is highly reliant on the willingness and ability of policymakers to pivot toward policies that are removed from Kenya's colonial past as an extractive state, which serves a minority and moves towards an environmental state that caters to the majority. Thank you very much for your attention and for your patience. I would appreciate any comments and questions that you may have.
Thank you very much, Dr. Oduba, and I'm also glad that I didn't have to interrupt you. First, I've just learned that Dr. Van Niekerk's husband is actually online following. It's a pleasure to have you to have you with us. And second, I'm not going to try and embarrass myself by trying to summarize the rich details that have come out from the three that I found are useful presentations. I'll just say that in addition to the technicalities that the various legislations, regulations outline, and of course court cases, the speakers have also sought to connect these issues to the broader issues of constitutional governance. And I am looking forward to read the details in the papers that would hopefully be published before the end of the year. I would like us to finish at 12:30, and so what I'm going to try and do is take 4 questions, preferably from 2 women and 2 men, and then I'll have the panelists address them, and if we still have time, we will have another round of questions. Dr. Man, here, and then 2 more there, so we're 4 people. Okay, I'll make an exception and have another one here. So we have 5 questions, and depending on the time, we'll come back to the audience. Thank you.
Thank you. So my question is for the first presenters. So El Salvador recently adopted Bitcoin as its official currency. So I was thinking, is there something that we can learn from in terms of their regulatory framework, in terms of this, that we can apply in Zimbabwe and in South Africa? And then just a second point to that question, there has been talk about a universal currency or a currency to facilitate trade in Africa in itself. Would that be a possibility of something that we can consider in that regard? Thank you.
Thank you so much for all the presentations. My question is for the last presentation, so talking about sustainable economic development and climate change. And I think my concern is that I think there's definitely, as we've discussed before, the both and requirement that we, as individual countries, as a region, we need to be thinking about what are we doing in terms of climate change and our own carbon emissions. But there's also the external factor of the fact that, I think in reality, the top 5 carbon emission producers, the US, China, UK, Germany, and Russia, account for more than 50% of the world's carbon emissions. And in fact, the US alone probably produces more carbon emissions than the entire African continent. And so I guess my question is, as individual countries and as an African continent, we can reduce our own carbon emissions, and I think it is right that we are going in the direction of sustainable and renewable energies, which is important for future generations. I think you talked about intergenerational justice, and so how we steward things for the future. But at the same time, all of that will still be useless if you don't have the political will and buy-in from the top carbon producers or carbon emission producers. And so I think this is my big concern, that as much as we can do, if on a global scale we don't have the commitment to reducing carbon emissions, it will be pointless and ineffective in the end. And so I guess I'm wondering to the last speaker, how do we overcome this issue that as a continent we can do, I think, our own part, but I don't know if that is enough to get us to where we need to be in terms of the climate crisis.
Thank you very much. We have the gentleman there and then 2 here in front. 2 there and then the gentleman here. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of the presenters for insightful presentations. To Dr. Van Niekerk, really just a comment to say that I do fully agree that financial stability is important and it is a precondition and of economic growth, and there's a slim chance that there will be one without the other. My question though is to the first presenters, Dr. Chitimira and Dr. Torerai, to say that there are two preconditions here where the test that was run in South Africa was only in relation to banking intermediaries, which means that they can only be used by banks, between banks. Now, given that currencies such as central bank digital currencies are developed with different policy objectives in different jurisdictions, how then can we say that introducing them in Zimbabwe or in South Africa will fit our policy objectives? How really do we say we have a jurisdiction that we can use to guide us and that will work in South Africa?
Thank you very much for the wonderful and insightful presentations. I have two questions, one for Dr. Van Niekerk and one for Prof. Chitimira and Dr. Torerai. Prof. Chitimira and Dr. Torerai, how you spoke about the regulation and use of digital currencies and financial services. How will the use of same contribute towards enhancing financial stability that Dr. Van Niekerk spoke about there? And now, Dr. Van Niekerk, the financial stability, yes, you spoke quite well about it. At the backdrop of the 2008 financial crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, I know you wrote about that 2008 financial crisis. Do you think that our current financial regulation is adequate to ensure that there is financial stability during the time of crisis, and also to ensure that there is financial inclusion, which Dr. Torerai and Prof. Chitimira spoke to? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My question goes to Prof. Chitimira and Dr. Torerai. With